What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Alex Cuesta Show. How's everybody doing out there on this Wednesday, March 15th of 2023? Unfortunately, tonight, it's just going to be me with our guest. David could not be here. He had to go to work. And if you guys like what you hear out here and you don't want us to have other jobs, if you want us to just continue to do this all the time, I need you to help us out. Like, share, follow, subscribe, rate 5 stars, and most importantly, spread this word of mouth. Go tell everyone you know this is one of your favorite shows. Get us a big following, and we could be here all the time. We don't have to have other jobs. And if you want to do that, go follow us on the socials at The Alex Cuesta Show. Just go look it up there. You'll find us. Before we jump into this week's show, we had a great show last week. We had Charles Love on. He's a co-host of Cut the Bull podcast. Familiar show. We've had on the other hosts. We had on Wilfred Riley and Shamika Michelle before. So we've had them all on. He's also the author of Race Crazy. We had a great show last week. Please go back and give it a listen. But this week, we have another fun show your way. He is somebody that if you pay attention, especially to conservative media, or you like to watch the press pools with the presidential press briefings, he's an individual that you might have gotten to know over the last few years, especially over the Obama administration. He is Simon Ateba, Chief White House Correspondent for Today News Africa, located in Washington, D.C. What's going on, Simon?
Thank you, Ale. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a great time. You know, it's not every day that I think people have the chance to talk to somebody who has been in these press briefings. I know, they've gotten significantly bigger. I really want to say Obama kind of blew them up, right? They became a full-on everyday thing under Barack Obama. Then it continued under Trump, and the tradition continues. But, we only get a glimpse of what goes on. We see the press secretary come out. Questions are answered and asked, well, sometimes answered, but you have a different view into that. First, I want to get into what is it like when you step into that room and being a member of the press pool there?
Okay, Alex, again, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me on the show. Covering the White House is really great, right? Many things happen behind the scene. It's not just the press briefing. You do background calls, the National Security Council. The National Security Council, it's almost like the brain behind the White House, right? Yeah. Every single thing in the U.S., even every single thing around the world is done at the National Security Council level before, it moves to the White House. And so we do many things, you talk to people, you cover the president, you receive statement, and then you go to the press briefings. You also watch TV and podcasts and programs like yours. And so eventually you get to that press briefing and then you have questions. And so what happened in that press briefing is, the press secretary, she comes out and then she has only 45 minutes, right? And there are 49 seats in that briefing room. It's not a big place, it's a small place. And journalists in the first and second rows, they're the ones who get all the questions. So we say, okay, Fox News and Peter Doocy or NBC News, CBS and AP and all the people that on TV. So to get to that briefing room is already hard. And to be there, it's extremely demanding. It's expensive to cover the White House. And also, a lot of people have been there for years. No one knows their name because it's hard to even get a question there. She has 45 minutes. She just calls on the same people. And so you have a press briefing where the same people get the questions all the time. And the people at the back and people in the middle and, in the back of the briefing room like me are like spectators. Like we come there, we watch them, have a show. And so from time to time, you have someone like me who say, hey, spread the question, let everyone get to have a chance to ask questions. And the questions that the American people really care about. And so what makes me unique is, my accent. I don't sound like you. I was born in Cameroon, grew up in Africa, used to cover West Africa, have been arrested in Cameroon for doing my job, attacked by pirates on the Gulf of Guinea, kept in a dark cell, kidnapped in Nigeria, been almost everywhere and survived, right? And so I have the experience there covering hostile environments. And so when I came to the US, I felt like, this is a great place. I won't be kidnapped anymore. I won't be arrested anymore. This is the beacon of free speech and freedom of the press. And so everything would be great. But when I got to the White House, covering it every day and seeing how things are done there every day, I now have a different experience.
Yeah, I can only imagine, it's a pleasure to talk to you because, I mean, being an American, grew up in New Jersey, I'm in New York now. I can't say that I have interacted with many people directly from Africa. I had a teammate at Marist College that he was from Africa. He came over to New York, but that's really my biggest extent of it, right? So it's great to see different perspectives and hearing these different things. I want to ask, you're in there. So like you said, there's a lot of different things that go into being a part of the press room, right? Do you get to go on the trips with the president? Are you part of that press pool, or is that only a select group of people that are allowed to attend the trip?
So it's not always a select group that is expensive, right? Every trip costs like $5,000. Some trips cost up to $15,000.
Wow.
Because the press pool, okay. So the journalists try to be independent, and they don't want the White House to pay for the trip. Mm-hmm. And so they try to be independent, so they pay for their own trip. And it gets expensive. If you are a small media organization that focuses on US-Africa relations, that's what Today News Africa does. We focus on one thing and one thing solely, US-Africa relations, and that's it. We focus on what is happening in Africa that affects the US and what is happening in the US that affects Africa. We will focus on things like there's a hearing, for instance, tomorrow on the AFRICOM, the US Africa Command, right? Yeah. Which is based in Germany. It's not even based in Africa, but their job, they're based in Stuttgart, Germany, and their job is to handle all the security issues that have to do with Africa. So that's a big bit. In December 2022, President Biden received nearly 50 African leaders in Washington, D.C. for the US-Africa Summit. Mm-hmm. That was the second time that summit took place. The first one was in 2014 during the Obama administration. And so when those people come to D.C. to discuss US-Africa relations, that's a big, that's our beat. That's what we do.
Cool.
And yeah.
So, I have to do a quick aside because you're in the White House a lot. Are the people like the Secret Service members that you probably see every day, probably a lot of the same people, are they friendly people? Or are they just like, regular people, like nice?
No, they're not. First of all, they're not the same people.
Okay.
So the White House is a machine, right? It's not one person. So many people and so many actors and so let me say it this way. There's no house in the world like the White House. So when you come into the White House, for you to have access to the White House, you need to have what they call a hard pass. When you're a journalist and you've been credentialed, you have a hard pass. The hard pass means, the Secret Service checks your background, no criminal record. They don't want someone who will come and endanger the life of the president.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
To make sure you don't have criminal record, all those stuff. So those are just basic things. Mm-hmm. And so you meet a lot of Secret Service outside the White House. Actually, they change them I don't know if it's 3 hours or 2 hours. So They keep changing. Yeah, no, they're big. They don't want someone who is exhausted. Imagine an agent who is there at the White House every day and spend 10 hours. They can't do the job. So they keep changing them. They keep moving them. They keep, so they are different people. You see different people every day. There's one or two persons that I always meet who have been there for a long time. Like during the Biden administration, I've seen them there a few times. But most other agents, they're not there every day. Sometimes you meet someone, an agent at the White House, and they tell you that this is the first time in DC, this is the first time they're in the White House. So they keep changing them.
I mean, that's some cool inside stuff, because I don't think many people know that. I don't think many people, they probably think that, the president has a separate, a set of secret agents only for him and, agents. And so that's actually pretty cool inside baseball that I don't think a lot of people know. So you've dealt with both Jen Psaki and now Karine Jean-Pierre. Which one have you liked more? Who do you think is a better press secretary right now?
All of them have lied a lot. All of them know how to spin. Jen Psaki knows how to spin better than Karine Jean-Pierre, right? Mm-hmm. Imagine you being the press secretary and you are there to actually do the job for the American people, but they don't do it that way. They are there to protect the president. So the president is great. He's doing a great job. He didn't actually fall down yesterday. What you saw was he almost fell down, but he wasn't. So that's what they do. They try to spin, they try to give explanation. And when you say inflation is going up and up, and we are now at this percentage, they try to point you to another data, so they keep...
it's a lot of propaganda. They're like a lot of propaganda,
a lot of lies, a lot of spin.
That's a good way to put it. Do you ever interact with the press secretaries outside of that moment when you're in the pool? Do you see them at other times and kind of talk to them?
Yeah, you go. Yeah, you can go. I go. I've had several interactions with both of them. You go to their office. You meet at coffee shop.
So how are they outside of that set? Because obviously they know they're on camera, so they're going to put on. Everyone puts on a little bit of something, right? How are they outside of that? Yeah, how are they outside of there? Are they friendlier? Are they like, oh, how are you, Simon? Or is it kind of still a little bit dicey because of the interactions you guys have had?
Okay, so when I used to ask softball questions,
mm-hmm.
My first question was, I asked Psaki if, the people who labeled President Biden Sleepy Joe, if they should apologize because the man seemed to be doing his job, and she was really happy, right? And so when they see me the next day, hey, Simon, how you doing? They used to call me a friend. And then when I saw the lies and the propaganda and all the stuff that were going on, then I began to ask serious questions. I say, hey, you gave this information and this false. And then they were no more as nice as they were before. They were no more receiving you in their office. And so it's once you begin to do your job, it gets tough for you. And that's what happened to me. Asking the right questions, not sending topics in advance, not sending questions in advance. Once you begin to do the work for the American people, then you become the enemy. They don't call on you anymore. They don't respond to your emails anymore. And then they brand you disrespectful, disruptive. And so it becomes really hard. And when you apply for credential to attend President Biden event, maybe press briefing, they don't credential you, they credential the same people. So it can be tough trying to do the right thing. And right now, she's not called on me in months, almost 6 to 7 months. And so I end up yelling my question. I end up expecting, even sending, it gets tough. Once you do your job, Alex, you become the enemy. And now so that's what I can say.
So we need more people like you, more journalists like you that are willing to, ask questions, right? Whether, and it's a simple situation where if what you're asking is factually incorrect, then correct it, right? Respond and correct it. So I do have to ask, because you have gotten a lot of popularity from the conservatives and the right, because you have, called out some things with Jen Psaki and KJP. And it's like, when you came over here, were you always a, free speech type of person? Were you always more of a small government type of person, or have you kind of seen what the left is in this country, and has that pushed you more towards the right?
Yeah, so when in 2020, right, our newspaper, Today News Africa, actually endorsed candidate Biden, right? Because we believe that this was a great guy. The New York Times told us that the guy who was there used an asshole, word against Africa. And so we didn't really, trust him. We were like, okay, Trump is a bad guy. Biden is the good guy. He says the right thing. He says he will fight for the little guy. And so we endorsed him. And so that's why I became full. I began to cover the White House full time. I was there during Trump, but it wasn't full time. I would come when he's receiving maybe the president of Nigeria, or on and off. I wasn't there full time. And I decided to become a full time staff because the good guy was in the White House.
Wow.
Only for me to begin to face discrimination. I began to realize that, first of all, people who have covered the White House longer than me, they realized that they had more access during previous presidents. They even had more access during President Trump than President Biden. Just to give you an example, President Biden has not come to the press briefing room even once in more than 2 years. This is his third year in office.
Yeah.
He's not come even once. And if he doesn't come, and today is March 15, if he doesn't come this year, next year is election. Nothing really happens next year. Everyone will be flying. He has to fly, try to win, the campaign and things like that. So it's going to be tough. So he's not come there. President Trump had this antagonistic relationship with the media, but they still had more access. More people attended the event. He came to the briefing room. He took questions. And even when President Biden briefs the media, what we realize is he reads a statement and doesn't actually take questions. And when he takes questions, he reads the names of the people he's been given to call on. So if he told them, I have 7 people and you are all supposed to ask me one question. And so you have 150 journalists there, you have 7 names, and they already have an idea of the questions that they will ask him.
And you can see that too, because whenever Biden goes to walk away, and if he turns around and he takes a question that he maybe wasn't supposed to, his answer is always beyond terrible. Like, his answers aren't great anyway. There are a lot of propaganda. But then when he gives his honest answer, you see a lot of President Biden coming out, and it's never good. And the thing with Trump too is, I think Trump fed off of that. He likes arguing. He likes debating. So when it came to access, he would ridicule the media, but he liked fighting with them. I think it was just part of the things that he enjoyed. So it was kind of good for you guys in the media, because you always knew, hey, Trump is going to at least fight with us and give us some clips and some good sound bites to go with.
Yeah, exactly. So you have those back and forth, right? Those clashes, those fights with President Trump. He will come, he will say you are fake media, and then he will give you. I know Governor DeSantis trying to do the same thing in Florida, but Trump is strong. Yeah. And so we have we had those clashes where he is like, okay, this guy doesn't like the media, but he actually answered questions, even though it was a contentious relationship, but we rather have that than have someone who just leaves and doesn't take any question. So,
So in 2024, if it's Biden versus Trump again, and Today News Africa has to endorse a candidate, are you going to endorse Donald Trump? Would you personally vote for Donald Trump this time around after interacting with both presidents?
Okay, so I don't know, right? Like, we don't really, usually we listen to them, their policies, what they're saying, even though they go there and they do something else. Yeah. but it's really hard when.
I mean, this time you have a record, right? For both of them, you have a record for each of them. They've each have served 4 years.
Yeah.
I mean, Trump has the black eye with COVID, right? I think a lot of conservatives are going to disagree with a lot of things he did on COVID.
Yeah.
But now at least like you have a record to go on for 4 years of each person.
Yeah. And also you see, okay, what's the US-Africa relation right now under Biden, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what happened last year around, I think that was March. So Russia-Ukraine war started in February of 2022. And so they had a big vote at the UN National, at the United Nations in New York City.
Yeah.
And the US usually has the support of African nations. And when they had that vote, they realized that a lot of African nations really didn't back the US the way they used to.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, oh my God, we are losing support. They didn't know. China is expanding, Russia is expanding, their ties and influence across Africa. And so what did they do? They say, oh, we need to do something. So in August, the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, went to South Africa to unveil what they described as the US-Africa new policy. And so in December, they decided to have the US-Africa Summit. And as you and I speak today, the Secretary of State is in Addis Ababa, where we have the biggest humanitarian crisis in 2022. It wasn't Ukraine. It was at least 600,000 people have been killed in Ethiopia during the Ethiopia-Tigray region. You didn't see billions and billions of dollars going there. So if it's about human suffering and human tragedy, a lot of money and, international mobilization should have been sent to Ethiopia, but money wasn't sent there as it should have been, and so they realized that they were losing African support, and now they're trying to play catch up when China is expanding, buying things, buying leaders, building infrastructure, building roads, bridges, and everything. And all I was telling them is, we are here to focus on US-Africa relations. So instead of actually treating us badly the way they are treating me in the White House, what they should do is to give us access so we can strengthen the relationship between US and Africa with accurate information at a time where China is spreading disinformation and misinformation against the US. It's almost like a curse where you are trying to do the right thing and the people who are supposed to help you actually oppose you. That's what is happening to me at the White House. So when we do the endorsement in 2024, it's going to be based on where is the relationship between US and Africa right now, and how do we move that relationship forward, and who is the best person to move that relationship at this now, and is it Trump, or we don't know if Trump will win the nomination, but everything seems to show that if elections were held today, Trump will win the GOP nomination. Yeah. So are we going to endorse Trump? Are we going to endorse Biden? It depends on where we are then.
Understandable. And yeah, and I want to get more into the U.S.-African relations a little bit later, but I just have to say, I don't know how any African nation really trusts the United States, or really many of the industrialized nations, because I feel like they all kind of use Africa as like we're going to help them. And then they really don't. My whole life, I'm 34 years old now. I have not seen a single meaningful thing from America actually done for the African nations. So I want to get into that a little more later. I want to stay a little bit on the press pool, and then because you have an interesting thing that happened to you lately, but I have to ask, because we see all these other journalists, you interact with them. How are all these other journalists at the pool? Is it kind of like a levels, like the people that get called on kind of stick with each other? And how are the other journalists? Are you guys friendly? What is that like?
Yeah, most people are friendly, right? Most people are friendly, but there's a lot of competition. Mm-hmm. And that's what the press briefings are supposed to be like. People compete, people are friendly, but they compete, and people come from different media organizations. For instance, the question that the New York Post we ask are completely different from the questions that the Washington Post, for instance, we ask. The Washington Post, we ask a question about something completely different, and the New York Post may ask about Hunter Biden, the laptop, China, and stuff like that. And, he doesn't get called on also. The Daily Caller, for instance, may ask questions about the border, and, she doesn't get called on also. The Newsmax, for instance, James Rosen of Newsmax, we ask critical questions about, the issues that people really care about. He doesn't get called on often. And so what happens is the press briefing is actually rigged. You have people will ask you friendly questions.
Yeah.
You give them the opportunity to ask you questions because, you say, okay, these are the networks and these are the big people and but that doesn't make sense. Once you have people in the briefing room and they have good questions and they speak for the American people, or they are asking you things that have to do with the American allies like me, anyone can ask you a great question, whether they work for CNN, MSNBC, CBS, NPR, any outlet. So you can't say that this person works for CNN, and because CNN has maybe 1 million views, I will give them the question, and I won't give the question to the person who has 500,000 views, because the person who has 500,000 views or readers can actually ask you a great question that people really care about. And so the basis, the criteria are already false. The premises of why they give questions to the same people. So people are friendly, but it's competition. And the press secretary knows how to use the pool or the journalists covering the press briefing to advance the president's agenda, advance the talking points of the president. And if you're someone like me who doesn't send questions in advance, doesn't send topics in advance, then you are seen as a danger. As a result, they punish you. And you will have a few people in the first and second rows who will fight for you because they're there to ask their own question. So if actually you're a distraction, because when you keep saying, call on people from the back, what you are saying is don't just call on people in the first and second rows, and then they won't like you that much because you are saying that, no, you need to be fair. Yeah. And so the press briefing is not based on fairness.
That's unfortunate because I feel like the press briefing should be for us, right? They should be for the American people to kind of get a gauge on that day where the president, where the White House, where the Justice Department is. But unfortunately, it's sad that it is exactly how it looks. You can look and see that it does look like it's rigged, and unfortunately, it's exactly how it is. Now, you've had something happen to you related to all this stuff. You have been kicked out of the White House Correspondents Association. What happened with that? What was the reasoning, and why did that happen?
No, it's just because I'm doing my job, right? Once you do your job.
And how did they kick you out? Like, how does that go?
So every year, you need to apply, you need to renew your membership. Mm-hmm. So I've been a member for a few years. So what happened between last year and this year? They just kicked me out because I'm doing my job. They said, your attitude last year, that was when I was asking about COVID, or when I was, when Dr. Fauci came to the press briefing for his last press briefing. And think about it. COVID has killed more than 1 million people in the US, if we must go by the official figures. And we don't know where it came from, or we have an idea of where it came from, but we actually had to rely on a leak to the Wall Street Journal to tell us that, it might have come from a lab leak in Wuhan, China. And But in the White House, when someone tried to ask that question to Dr. Fauci last November, they tried to shut the person down, dress her down. And I intervened. I said, no, she has a valid question. She's asking about the origin of COVID-19. And they said that was a bad thing. So they actually punished me for raising my voice when more than 1 million people have died. No, think about it. They punish you for raising your voice and saying that the person has a valid question and Dr. Fauci is the best person to answer that question. They punish you for that. And so they decided not to renew my membership. Actually, once you're a member of the White House Correspondents Association, for them to kick you out, they need to suspend you first. They need to vote. 2/3 of the members have to vote. They didn't do any of that. So they just waited for me to apply for renewal and say, okay, no, we can. So, and it has to do with me doing the right thing, asking the right questions, not sending my questions in advance, doing my job, right? Doing my job as a journalist. And when you do that, when you do the right thing, when you focus on the right thing, when you decide to just do the right thing, be a good journalist, people come after you. And the White House Correspondents Association has now come to help Karine Jean-Pierre to, get rid of me. It doesn't mean I'm no more covering the White House. I'm covering the White House. I have my hard pass, but it means that I will have less access. I can, for instance, go attend the White House Correspondents Association dinner with the president, which is taking place next month, next April. I can have access to many events. And it's tough, and it's only because I'm doing my job, only because I'm asking the right question. And they try to cripple me, cripple our business, and just get rid of us.
Is there any way that my listeners can help you out? Is there anything we can do in terms of petitioning or, maybe talking, like writing letters to our representatives or anything like that, or senators that want to stand up for the free press and for people asking those questions? I know, now Representative Matt Gaetz, Bober, Bishop, they're all doing a great job there standing up for freedom and things like that. Would us doing anything there, would you be able to go, and do you have access to talk to any of those representatives and be like, hey, I'm on my way out, what can we do? Like, maybe put public pressure on the association to get you back in.
Yeah, so I need public pressure will work. I want everyone to reach out to their representative. And it's not just me, right? It's free press. Free press is in danger. The freedom of the press, the freedom of expression, all those things are in danger. They try to punish someone, a journalist, for doing their job, trying to silence them, trying to isolate them. It's actually a danger. And, kicking them out because they're just trying to do their job is really sad. The U.S. remains the best country in the world, the most advanced country. The U.S. is not China. The U.S. is not Russia. The U.S. is still a country where you can do many things that you can't do in other parts of the world. But it's still sad that, this could happen to me. This could happen to people who are trying to do their job. And, it makes me, as I said, very sad to realize that I'm being punished for just doing my job, for asking the questions that the American people really care about, for standing out, for speaking up, for saying that this is not right. You need to call on everyone. You need to give people the chance to, even people you disagree with. You are not there to rig the press briefing. You are not there to call on the people who ask you softball questions. Yeah. We ask you nice questions, and that's really sad. And I want everyone to support us, reach out to their representative. Also, subscribe to our Substack so that we can have the resources, the funds that we need to keep doing this. Because what happens to you is when you do this, when you stand up, people are even afraid to give advertisement to your media organization. Yep. Because they don't want to look bad. And so you are here fighting hard, doing the right thing, and now you don't even have enough money because people are not. So I want people to really speak up and support us.
Certainly. Yep. Go subscribe to the Substack, because especially if you are speaking out right now, advertisers are scared, and membership is only what's going to continue to drive people who are fighting for what you believe in to continue to do that. So, let's help Simon get back on there again, talk to your representative. Now, since you have been kicked out of the association, obviously you can still go to the press briefings because you have your hard pass. Have any journalists that you've been with now for a few years, have they reached out to you about this and talked to you about this? Do they know, or is anyone standing up for you? Or are they a little bit too scared to stand up?
Yeah, so people stand up in private. No one does it in public. Yep. People text you, they tell you this is not right. We shouldn't do this to you. You speak for us. People send me text messages, but they don't want to look bad, right? They want to get their questions asked. They still want to be called on. And so if they are too forceful, some of them even are afraid to write your story, because if they do that, the press secretary, we end up seeing them, the administration, we end up seeing the story, and they don't want to be in that position. They want to be in the good book of the press secretary. So what happens is, when you do the right thing, you end up being lonely, actually. You are lonely, you are abandoned, and you are discouraged. But then people begin to write you, people from outside. Thousands and thousands of people begin to send you letter. People, send you book, and then they, like this one, then they sign them. People, awesome. Begin to support you. To go to your Substack, simonateba.substack.com. They go to your Twitter account, they follow you, they write you, they encourage you, they pray for you, they invite you. People like you, they give you a platform to speak your truth, they try to get your message out there. And so that's what comfort you. You realize that the people are for you, and hundreds of thousands of them, millions of them. And even though the White House is discriminating against you, even though some of your colleagues are too afraid to stand up for you, but the people are for you. And, I wear that as a badge of honor. Imagine if I was this guy who had been arrested for breaking into a shop. You say, oh, black guy who's been arrested breaking into a shop. But now, I don't do any of those things. I have no criminal record. I've done only one thing in my life, doing journalism, did my first degree in journalism, had my first degree in journalism, had my second degree in journalism. Even when there's chaos in the White House, it's always because I'm trying to do the right thing. And I believe that in the end, truth ages well. Truth ages well. When you do the right thing, even when it's controversial, in the end, you have many people rallying around you, many people supporting you. When I went to CPAC, I had hundreds of people lining up to take pictures with me, to encourage me, to pray for me. And that gave me some hope. That was a big deal for me, because it showed me that, even though you're not being given the opportunity to do your job in the White House, the people see it and they are there for you. And that was great.
I guess, there's a few things here. First off, I'm calling out Peter Doocy. Peter Doocy, you're the one that gets called on all the time. You should be standing up for people that are speaking free truth, free to power, wanting to be free speech. So you should be the person standing up and defending somebody like Simon and his right to stay on there. So calling him out, that's first. Second, I have to say, I was ecstatic when you even started to talk back to me, because I did know of you as, you were a badass. You were the one that stood up and tried to get someone, calling us from the back. Like, what are you doing? Like, I thought that was awesome. And it wasn't just, people sometimes will do something like that, right? And then when they get reprimanded, they'll go away. You didn't go away. You won't go away. And that's what I think people like to get behind you for, because you're not doing it for the 15 minutes of fame. You're not doing it for that one quick write-up and that blurb on the article. You're actually doing it because you believe in it. So, I'm encouraged that you are going to continue to fight and do your job, because I think that we need more journalists like you And like the people that we see that were on Capitol Hill, your Matt Taibbi's, your Michael Schellenberger's, your Barry Weiss, the ones that are not conservative. None of those people are conservative. They're a bunch of Biden voters, Obama supporters, but they just see something wrong, right? They see something wrong, and true journalists, if it's their side, it doesn't matter. They're going to go try and find truth. So, I love that you're there. I love that you're going to keep fighting. Now, I want to jump into what your paper, like you said, does. Really focuses on American-African, African-American relations, right? And I don't mean African-American as Black people. Sorry, guys. I mean African and America relations. So when you're looking at it, how does what goes on in America, our politics, how much does that affect what goes on in Africa?
Okay, very little, right? Because there's a lot of money involved. The IMF, the World Bank, those are the institutions that the U.S. uses. The IMF, the World Bank for loans, for projects, for, all those things. But in the end, when you go back and see how much money can nation during COVID and how much was achieved, you don't really see results. You don't see those results. And so what I think has to be done, and also you see a lot of China. You see China expanding, growing. Even countries in the Middle East are now doing bigger and better than the US. And so what I'm telling them in the White House is, instead of trying to get rid of us, you need to encourage us. You need to support us, because Today News Africa focuses on one thing, US-Africa relations. And as I explained before, we don't cover every single thing that happened in Africa. Yeah. We actually focus on what happened in Africa that affect the US and what happens in the US that affect Africa. Right now, the Secretary of State is in Ethiopia. And, Ethiopia had the biggest global crisis in 2021 and 2022, and even now in 2023. Millions of people had been displaced. 600,000 people were killed. And so more people were killed in Ethiopia, Tigray region than anywhere else in the world. The US was involved, but it wasn't enough. We didn't see those billions and billions of dollars that were sent to Ukraine.
For those that don't know what happened in Ethiopia, because I feel like this is something that people would want to know, because you've said it a few times, but what actually happened there that, everyone's focused on Ukraine and everything like that. But, I think most people haven't heard of anything going on in Ethiopia, right? So what exactly happened there?
Okay, so, there's a region in Ethiopia called Tigray. That region is located in the northern part of Ethiopia. And for almost 30 years, they were in power. They're actually the minority. The US has been behind them for decades. So they were in power for almost 3 decades. And eventually power shifted to someone else. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed became prime minister in 2018. In 2019, he won the Peace Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize. And so everyone expected, because of the peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And so everyone expected that, you won't have war. So in November 2020, the Ethiopian government and the TPLF, which is the armed faction in Tigray, began to fight over some dispute. They blame each other. Everyone blames, the Ethiopian government blames TPLF has blamed the Ethiopia. But anyway, that war went on from that November 2020 to 2021, 2023. The US was able to, with the collaboration of the African Union, to have a peace deal last year. But before that peace deal, it was the war had gone on for 2 years. 600,000 people had been displaced. Millions of people had been killed. Millions of people had been displaced. And also because Ethiopia is located in the Horn of Africa, there's a big humanitarian crisis there caused by drought. There's a big drought there that is affecting Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya, and all the countries around the Horn of Africa. So one would think that with 600,000 people killed, the US will be more involved, and the EU will be more involved, the African Union will be more involved. But what you had was the attention was just on Ukraine. Actually, the WHO, the head of the WHO, who is from Ethiopia, and he comes from the Tigray region, he used to denounce that. He used to say, hey, I understand you guys are focused on Ukraine, but people are dying in Ethiopia. We need international mobilization. The blame game has to stop. Someone has to intervene. What we realized was it was a double standard. The attention wasn't really there the way it should have been. The US was involved, but it wasn't on the same level than in Ukraine. And so that's what's been happening there. And so those are the things that we focus on when it comes to peace, the US involvement in peace talks, what the US is doing in Africa, why is Blinken in Africa, what impact is Blinken visit having in Africa. The First Lady just returned from Africa. The Vice President is going to Africa at the end of this month, and the President himself has promised to go to Africa. What is the impact of the US-Africa Summit that took place in December? Johnny Carson has been appointed by President Biden to oversee the implementation of the US-Africa Summit. Is that having an impact? So those are the things that we need to always have a feedback from the White House and ask them questions. And you can decide that you want to have Reuters or AP do that job, but those guys don't actually focus on US-Africa relation. They focus on US, and then from time to time they have, okay, Blinken is going to Africa, they talk to people. But if we are strong, if we have people supporting us, we can actually do the job, have teams everywhere that focus on that US-Africa relation. But when you undermine us, what you are doing is you are actually undermining the US-Africa relation. You're undermining the person who can actually do the job. And that's what we want to do. We just want to focus on US-Africa relation and make sure that, the disinformation from China, the misinformation from China or Russia, that they have no impact. We will tell them, hey, this is where the relationship is. This is the investment that the US is making. This is what the US, this is the plan. Let's detail it, let's discuss it. And we go beyond just doing it in the newspaper, on the website. We'll also have podcasts and interaction with African leaders. We can make it big, but instead of helping us, what they are doing to us, they're actually undermining us, which is a shame.
It is a total shame. And, I'm happy to hear that, the vice president's going, Anthony Blinken's going, but where's the news, right? You talked about China. China has their Belt and Road Initiative, and it's doing things that I feel like America should have been doing for Africa for so long. And I don't think the issue is, I don't think it's going to get done with the politicians, right? Because if you go to a lot of these African governments, they're not as open. They're not going to help the poor as much, right? I feel like we have all these billionaires in this country. They talk about, let's do this, let's do that, let's help this, let's help that. Why are they not going and setting up, businesses in Africa to employ Africans, to get them to work, to help them build this infrastructure that they need? And also, I just think that we need to be focusing as a country, as a superpower, on more of African development, right? Because there's way too much underdeveloped land in Africa, and there's millions of people that could use fossil fuels, that could use a good, natural gas place in order to power up their houses and get electricity with coal and things like that. So I really feel that's where the focus should be on. And I don't understand why America doesn't want to do that. And again, it's not just Africa either. So they don't care about South America. They don't care about anywhere else besides like the few big places, right? So
the US tries to do that through the World Bank and the IMF and other institutions who are not actually helping Africa.
They're all corrupt.
Yeah, they're corrupt and they are there for profit.
Yes.
And so they give you these loans, and the loans. So it's corruption, but China is doing the opposite. China is corrupt. They're doing a lot of corrupt. China is also corrupt, but they are building roads, they are building bridges, they are providing infrastructure. And so people are shifting toward China. And the US doesn't even have a clue, right? They don't even have a clue that China is just buying government, building infrastructure and doing stuff. And they are not doing it like the loans are extremely high. When the Chinese invest the money, there's no transparency. The interest rate is extremely high. And if you can't pay back, they can actually take over the country. They can take those infrastructure, and we have some examples where you build a port and people can't pay back, and then they need to take over. So I'm saying, what we are saying is, why wouldn't you encourage that guy who is trying to focus on US-Africa relations and then drive the conversation? Bring all the experts and say, hey, this is where the US-Africa relations stand. This work can be done. Let's discuss it. Let's see how we move it. That's what we are trying to do. Like, that's like, we are not trying to undermine the US, and we are not trying to undermine Africa. We are actually trying to strengthen ties between US and Africa. And then we are undermined by the US when China is spreading misinformation and disinformation against the US, when they're taking over lands and projects, and the US is almost disappearing. And so I find that so ironic, right? That the person who is trying to do the right thing, the person who is saying, we are not asking you to give us money. We are asking you to give us access, so that we can drive that platform. And what's even wrong in giving us grant so that we can do our job fairly without grants that are not with no strings attached, right? You're not telling us, okay, we are giving you a grant so that you can write this. We won't do that. But if we have enough resources to do our job and to drive that conversation, is it not beneficial for the relationship between US and Africa? Will you rather have a Chinese company? They actually buy media houses, send out media houses. And so now some people don't even listen to anything US anymore. And I'm almost like telling them, hey, help us. Help us. We are trying to do the right thing. Don't undermine us. But trying to do the right thing means we are also going to be tough even on you when you are not doing the right thing. Yeah. And don't punish us because we are doing the right thing, asking the right question, trying to focus on things that you don't want to focus on. And which is a shame, which is a real shame.
It is. And that's kind of my fear, is that what China's doing is, what are they going to do? They're going to come in, they're going to build some infrastructure, they're going to build some nice houses, they're going to give bare minimum things by Western standards and by Chinese standards, but to people that are poor, these are amazing things. And then what are they going to do? They're going to turn around to the leaders of those countries and say, hey, we just brought you guys into the modern world. We own you. And everything that we need now, you're going to do. And I think that, and then what is America going to do? They're going to turn around and say, well, China was evil. China took over this nation. And yes, we all know the end game for China is to get the resources and to use them. But at the same time, they are going to make people a positive change in people's lives initially. Then they're going to put them into servitude under what they want. But it's like any other dictatorship. It's like any other autocrat. You make the people comfortable, give them things they didn't have at the bare minimum level, and then you take them over because they're loyal forever. So I don't want to see that happen. I think that it's a big mistake if America keeps on ignoring Africa. So, I applaud you for what you guys are trying to do. And I think that you've seen that we don't have to agree politically in order to agree on the fact that you guys should have your freedom to do certain things, right? You should be able to have all the same basic freedoms that we believe in the Bill of Rights here. Because anyone that believes in the Bill of Rights and Constitution doesn't believe it just should stay in our borders. We think that everyone should have those rights. Me personally, I don't want to force it on anybody because that's, it's not my thing. But I believe that they should at least have the ability to go after that. So I don't want to see China take over, but unfortunately, with this current administration, we'll see. We'll see if all these trips to Africa do anything. Do I have high hopes for the Biden administration? No. But again, crazy things can happen, right, Simon? But they need to continue. They need to let you back in more. They need to give you more access because I think you could, as you're trying to describe, you could be an ally to them instead of them trying to push you away.
Yeah, maybe the last thing I will say, since I have to go. The last thing I will say is, just imagine that you are making all those trips to Africa. You are going to Africa, you're inviting people who are, some of them dictators, who are stealing money from their countries, and you're inviting them to DC. But the person covering the White House, you are not calling on them. You are not giving them questions. You are not giving them access. You are disrespecting them. But you claim to respect the people who are in Africa. And I'm almost telling them, open your eyes. I'm here in your midst. I'm here with you. I'm trying to do the right thing. I have a team. We are just trying to be an ally. We are trying to strengthen US-Africa ties with accurate and relevant information. Don't undermine us. Don't you have eyes? Don't you have a heart? Like, it's almost like telling them what they are supposed to do and they are not doing it. And it's almost like a cursed country, like almost as if the country is cursed, or not the country, the leaders, the people in charge are not seeing what is happening, that China is taking over, buying countries, building infrastructure, and the people who are poor, as you said, they're like, okay, I'm poor, the US is not here, at least China has given me a road. At least China has given me a phone. At least China has given me a house. And they're corrupt, but they've given me something. And the US is missing the picture. And we need to start having real conversation. And that conversation, that's what Today News Africa is trying to drive. And how do they pay us back? They actually undermine us, which beats my imagination.
So, Simon, I really appreciate you coming on. I thought this was a fantastic show. You gave us a lot of good inside information about what the press room is like. I think that's awesome. Things that we really don't hear. And I think that your mission is great. And I think that by extension, you fighting to get those relations harder and stronger between America and Africa are going to go far. But you also fight for free speech and you fight for freedom of information and freedom of press. So you have a lot of support. You have our support. I want everybody go search for Simon on Twitter at Simon Ateba. Go to his Substack again, simonateba.substack.com, and go support Today News Africa, because all three of those things can use your support. Please go become a member if you can, but if not, go follow on Twitter, go do all these little things that you could do to help out. So again, Simon, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Alex. Thank you.
All right, everybody. We will be back next week. So long, all.